And here's my other thing I omitted, but having that counsel and understanding that you never, ever want to talk to your police and give an interview without your counsel present, without a counsel that you've talked to in advance, that you've gone over things, etc. But whether you're a civilian or private citizen or a law enforcement officer, never, ever walk in there without your attorney present.
Today's guest is Kevin Davis. Kevin's a nationally recognized expert on police use of force and officer survival. He's a renowned author, and he is an award-winning trainer. This is an episode you're not going to want to miss. Kevin, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks, Rich. It's nice to see you, my brother, and it's nice to see that we're both retired from full-time law enforcement.
Amen. Yeah.
It's a good time to be retired. Absolutely it is, Kevin, but neither of us are very good at being retired, especially you, because you are all over the place doing a million things, most of it having to do with expert witness testimony, I believe. So I want to get into that. But first, I want to get into sort of what maybe shaped your personality or whatever it is before you got into law enforcement, because you've done a lot since. But before law enforcement, I know, just like me, you were an absolute lifelong martial artist. And I want to talk a little bit about that, about your martial arts upbringing and what role that might have played on where you're at now. Certainly. Well, first of all, I am the son of a school teacher, and my brother is now retired from teaching. So, I was involved in sports at a young age. I played baseball, football, soccer, pretty much the gamut, wrestled, etc. And having my dad around, who was, I can honestly say that I never beat my late father at any game, whether it was shooting hoops or anything else. I could probably, he never played football, and I was bigger than he was, so I could probably beat him on the football field, but not anywhere else. And so I was encouraged to pursue athletics and did play, as I said, through high school. I was actually a decent high school football player, but unfortunately in my senior year, I completely tore off my ACL, which pretty much ended my hopes for college play. And I still was, a couple of small Ohio colleges were trying to recruit me, but I knew that it was a question of walking or playing football later in life, and I chose to walk. So that said, I entered university and I studied elementary education. My goal was to be an elementary school English teacher, and it wasn't to be. I started working security. I was laid off from one job, and way back in 1981, thereabouts, 81, I started working security because they allowed you to study at some of the accounts that I worked. It was mostly like closed factories or businesses over the weekend, and I could study at night or on the weekends. It got me on the dean's list. But I started working security in the summer at an outdoor concert facility in northeastern Ohio called Blossom Music Center, which is to this day one of the nicest outdoor concert venues in the country. And it got me in contact with a lot of law enforcement officers, and I got bitten by the bug. And next thing you know, I'm pursuing law enforcement. I went through the first Sheriff's Academy way back in 1982, Rich, and worked for the local Sheriff's Department for about 8 years, and then was hired by City of Akron, Ohio Police Department, where I worked for the next 31. So during that period of time, I guess it was because of my background. I mean, I had a cousin that was a pretty renowned martial arts instructor. He was in the Chinese systems, and that kind of piqued my interest a little bit. And when I got involved in law enforcement,
I was curious. I had a wrestling background, football background. I wasn't unaccustomed to physical contact, but I wanted to be proficient in suspect control. So early in my career, I started looking at all that, bought a lot of books from Paladin Press on some of this. One of our old buddies, Masada Yub, wrote a book on police impact weapons I read way back. And so I just started evolving with that and had the opportunity to train with some fabulous instructors in suspect control as well as martial arts, and a little bit of Muay Thai, a little bit of Western boxing. Filipino martial arts was a big area for me. I trained with the late Mike Ane and Eskrima, Ane and Eskrima, and so that was throughout my law enforcement career. And as well as I'm pretty proud that after I watched the first UFC fight way back and saw the Brazilians and ground fighting dominating, and that had kind of mirrored my experiences in real life and on the street. So I brought Brazilian grappling into our in-service and basic academies right after the UFC. So that was, and it went on to firearms and everything else.
That's awesome, Kevin. I think that background has absolutely not only shaped your law enforcement career, but your sort of second career now with what you're doing. How important do you think it is that a law enforcement use of force instructor have some kind of martial arts background versus someone who's just, maybe he does well statistically, he performs well, so they decide this is the model officer, let's send him to be a defensive tactics instructor?
Well, the responsibility to be a competent instructor is so great that any caring instructor, especially when you're new, you have that, what do they call it, the imposter syndrome, where you've been put in this position, but you always doubt your capabilities. And and one of the things I did is, for instance, especially in Brazilian martial arts and their ground game, is bring in people that studied with some advanced instructors. We had a former Brazilian national champion in the area. A couple of my guys had trained with them. And so I said, hey, man, you guys take over this part of the curriculum. But yeah, if you care about your peeps, you've got to be, first of all, competent. It's like stepping up in front of a line of shooters, Rich. You know this. You got to be able to demonstrate. And I know you had our old buddy Chris Sereno on, and Chris and I were, when we instructed together, were big on that. It's like, hey, your students have to know that you can do the skills as well as just talk about them.
Yeah, I think that's important, because in 2 weeks, you're not going to learn. I say 2 weeks because the defensive tactics instructor school I went to was 2 weeks long. There was huge pieces of paper lined up around the room, hundreds and hundreds of techniques, really not related very well to one another. Just like, do this, do this, do this. And it was overwhelming for me. And I was a second degree black belt at the time. I can't imagine these guys with absolutely no martial arts training. How are they supposed to recall this stuff? How are they going to remember this to bring it back to their agency, first of all? And when they get back, how are they going to teach this to people who are less knowledgeable than them? I mean, it's not setting people up for success. But so with the martial arts, there's sort of an underlying theme, at least in legitimate martial arts, especially traditional martial arts, that, don't want to say the cliche to be used for defense only, but that your response needs to be proportionate to the threat. And that's very apropos to law enforcement as well. Someone sticks their finger in your chest and insults your mother. You can't, break a glass bottle over their head and stomp their groin, right? I mean, so
well,
I think that's
Rich.
important.
You can.
Yeah. You're right.
You just end up going to jail.
It is an option. So did you start very early on as a defensive tactics instructor? based on your background, training in all these different arts and things like that?
Well, it was a process. I first was asked to do it for the basic academies. I had been recently certified within a couple of years of my work at the Akron Police Department. I had been certified as a basic academy instructor, what they call a unit instructor, and firearms instructor as well. And from that, they came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to take over the suspect control training program?" And I said, okay, but you're going to have to fund my education, because just walking in there, as you well know, a lot of the things we learned, whether in boxing or in the, and I consider that a martial art, of course, but all that. The basics translate, but there's still a degree of things. As a deputy, for instance, I went through American Corrections Aikido training, and we had a little bit of exposure to joint locks way back. That would have been, 82 maybe, a little 83. But the problem was I knew enough to attempt a joint lock, but probably get my rear end handed to me. So, the agreement was okay, you're wanting me to do this, and I'll do it, but you have to fund my education. So that started that, which was a career-long pursuit of excellent training across the United States. And you and I have been to some of those premier law enforcement training programs, so yeah, it's a lot more than just being able to throw a reverse punch, and competently do it on yourself, to stand up there in front of a group of law enforcement students and train them in this stuff.
Yeah, the only thing worse than training cops is training cops at your own agency, right? Because
right.
They know you and they're not taking you seriously. But having traveled as much as you have, Kevin, the opposite is also true. When you fly in, with a briefcase, then you have instant credibility over someone you may know just as much, that works at that agency. And we've kind of experienced both ends of that spectrum. But
yeah, it can't be a prophet in your own land.
Exactly, it can't be a prophet in your own village. Absolutely. So maybe you could talk a little bit about use of force, Kevin, and there is a difference between use of force by a police officer and use of force by a private citizen, but there are definitely parallels. So maybe just in the most basic of terms, you can talk about what it means to be reasonable in your use of force.
Yeah, and that's exactly right, Rich. That's what I was going to point out, is both the public sector in law enforcement and the private sector is got the reasonableness standard, whether it's a reasonable officer or reasonable person in the private sector. And oftentimes, what's nice about the law enforcement realm is that we have case law like Tennessee versus Garner and Graham v. Connor and some other Supreme Court decisions, which says things like what Graham said, which is objective reasonable force is incapable of precise definition or mechanical application. And what we had when I first started was, and a lot of people were pushing it, and you have to be careful in both worlds, because there's a lot of commercial programs out there that are pushing things that they're trying to sell, make money, and there's nothing wrong with the commercial aspect of it. But for instance, back in the day, it was the use of force continuum. And you had these private ventures that would go around the country and train the students on the use of force continuum. And it was based on the +1 theory. In other words, if a suspect is throwing a punch, you don't have to throw punches back. You can exceed that force by 1 level. So you could use impact weapons, etc., or intermediate weapons, as we call them now. And in truth, that's what we got fleshed out over the years in my career, because both Tennessee versus Garner was 1985 and Graham v. Connor was 1989. So both those decisions came out after I was involved in law enforcement. And what they did was give us a better understanding of what was expected from law enforcement officers. And you still in the civilian sector have some of that by case law. What an objectively, what a reasonable citizen can do or a person can do. But, there are things in Graham and Tennessee versus Garner that apply things like, officers are often forced to make decisions in circumstances which are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving. That's case law. And that their use of force is not to be judged in 20/20 hindsight. That's very true, but in the civilian sector, they don't have so much of that, but a lot of it applies. When you have talking about time constraints, you're talking about the perfect hindsight vision. In other words, being able to look back on a private citizen's use of deadly force and say, oh, he could have just gotten in his car and driven away. Well, that's not the question. The question is whether his use of deadly force was reasonable at the moment that it was applied. So there's a lot of corollaries there. And in some states, amazingly enough, because some states have restricted use of deadly force by law enforcement more than civilian self-defense. And so actually civilians have more of an allowance in self-defense than police officers, but it's true.
That's amazing. Yeah, I saw some videos, Kevin, regarding New York Police Department and some of the defensive tactics techniques that they're prohibited from doing. And it's just crazy. I mean, it's just basic stuff. It's nothing particular injurious or over the top. It's just basic defensive tactics techniques that a cop or a citizen would use to try to get themselves in a better position.
Let's take a look. Yeah, let's just, if I may, Rich, about the lateral vascular neck restraint or carotid restraints. You and I both learned them in martial arts and learned them in suspect control training. However, what was it, the Daniel Penny case on the subway? Here's a former Marine trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he renders the subject unconscious. He's put on trial. And how many law enforcement agencies and states have outlawed LVNR, even though it's very non-injurious and very effective?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you brought up another point about Graham versus Connor, which is that an officer can't be judged with the benefit of 20/20 hindsight. But yet, frustratingly, and I know this is a bigger frustration for you than even me, because this is what you're dealing with on a daily basis, that tends to be what's happening lately. After there's a very public police use of force, there's an outcry, the cops are demonized, and then they start looking at, well, if the officer had just done this, then maybe it wouldn't have escalated to that point. And to piggyback on that frustrating question I posed, there's also the element of de-escalation. That de-escalation is the end all to beat all, and that it's the solution to every problem. But as well as I do, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, that cops are excellent at de-escalating. Obviously, we do that on a daily basis. But sometimes the safest thing to do for the officer, for the citizenry, and in some cases even for the suspect, is to be overwhelmingly violent soon enough. And that way, you could prevent a situation where now, instead of just having a hands-on response, where you maybe struck the guy with the heel of your palm as hard as you can, now you're in a situation where you're having to resort to a firearm, some other much more higher level of force. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, about how how you may be judged after a police use of force, or after a private citizen, if you're involved in use of force, how you may be judged after the fact. And secondarily, how de-escalating a situation may not be the solution.
Well, to begin with, let's not forget that the same people that are currently prosecuting police officers and perfectly lawful officer-involved shooting incidents are also prosecuting private citizens in the lawful use of deadly force. In Ohio, there was a county prosecutor that made the statement that if officers succumb to the temptation of using deadly force, then we're going to charge them. And I've worked 4 or 5 murder cases down there where officers have been charged in perfectly lawful use of force incidents. I've also worked private citizen self-defense cases there. And so what I see amazingly is across the country, and I've testified from Iowa to Georgia now, and points in between. And I see that there's a lot of botched investigations out there by the criminal investigators, from whether it's the police department or the state police, that they bring in an outside entity or outside investigative agency. And, I wrote a book about use of force investigations years ago because I saw friends of mine that were being charged and perfectly good, or not charged, but, were the focus of a criminal investigation, and improperly. So you have these poor investigations taking place. Once again, there's different standards, and the public may not know this, but in a police shooting, you have different investigations, and some of these go on concurrently, and some of them are separated. There's a criminal investigation to see whether the use of force was within the law. There is an internal investigation to see whether the policy was followed by the officer or officers. But there's also this media investigation and the public investigation. And though the media and public, unfortunately, are fueled by politics. And you have these officers, once again, and this just happened recently, where, on a case in my area, the federal judge dismissed the case on summary judgment, finding that the facts, when looking at them in a light most favorable to the plaintiff, did not support, the civil case. So he dismissed the civil case, but the media still attacks the officers. So they've already been cleared on the criminal investigation. They've already went through a civil process where the judge found that there was not sufficient evidence to warrant the continued civil case, and yet they're being attacked. And this happens very much. I mean, I worked a private citizen case, I think it wrapped up this year, in which, although the insurance company settled, it was very favorable and they were very happy, but it was on Ring doorbell and captured, where a subject arrived at a family's home. He hadn't been there or hadn't seen the young girl, his former girlfriend, for a couple of years, and he forces his way into the front door, even though he's told to leave and told that the homeowner had a gun. Homeowner shoots and kills him. And you couldn't believe what the expert witness for the plaintiffs was alleging. If only they had opened up the door, then all this would have gone away. And he even made an opinion that was contrary to the evidence. And that's what people like myself deal with all the time. So you talk about the standards. Oftentimes what they want to forget are the legal standards and focus in on things like officer-created jeopardy. And the same thing with a private citizen. If the citizen had just chose to not answer their front door, had chose to retreat into their house and pick up the phone and call 911, and all these shoulda, woulda, coulda standards, and that's not the legal standards, So we have that part of it, and what the plaintiffs, and I don't work a lot of civil cases. Most of my cases are criminal. So what the prosecutors oftentimes are doing are trying to come up with these hindsight-based officer-created jeopardy things, that the officer, if he, and the standard one is taken more time and created distance, and it never would have happened. Well, it's irrelevant because, we're not judging him on what he could have, would have, should have done. In Ohio, we have a case called State v. White that says specifically not to do that. But even Ohio prosecutors are ignoring it. And then you talk about de-escalation, once again, time and distance. But see, the problem is that policy like de-escalation for an agency, even private sector with citizens, de-escalation is not a law. In other words, you don't have to attempt something. If deadly force is called for and at the moment, then you don't have to attempt these other forms of less lethal control. And you got a case out there, it's called Plakis versus Drinsky, which talks about that. Guy came at the officer with the fireplace poker, and the big allegation was back at the day is that he should have pepper sprayed him. Well, judges said, no, the question is was force at the moment reasonable, within a range of reasonableness? And once again, reasonableness is not precise. It can't precisely be defined, or we can't use it like a graphic, like use of force continuum. So I think I got both of them, but once again, they're going after officers and private citizens because that pre-incident behavior.
Yeah, and that's what's scary. No, you absolutely did, Kevin. But that's what's scary is they can make it sort of outcome based. Like, here's a hypothetical. If a police officer is responding to a residence and he inadvertently parks too close to the residence, which I've done before, I'm sure you've done before, and he gets out and there's some dude lying in wait on the front porch, they get in a shootout. It seems as though that they may blame the officer these days that, well, you didn't use proper tactics. You parked too close to this target residence. So because of your bad tactics, that's what prompted this shooting. And it's crazy. I mean, because you would have to be perfect, because I don't care how well trained you are. I don't care how experienced you are. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to make tactical errors. And what that does is it petrifies cops, and it leads to the whole depolicing thing, which is a whole other podcast in itself. But yeah, it's tough. I remember, Kevin, I would always tell my guys that, hey, as long as you do what's right, you're within policy, and you're doing things for the right reasons, things will work out okay as far as your use of force. But toward the end of my career, I couldn't really, in good conscience, tell them that anymore, because we were starting to see samples to the contrary. And that's why I'm so grateful for the stuff that you're doing, Kevin. It's super stressful. I mean, I've done the expert witness stuff. I just, dunked one toe in the water to see what that was like. Man, this is pretty stressful, but I appreciate what you're doing and all that. I want to give a couple plugs to your books. You mentioned the Use of Force Investigation for Law Enforcement book, but there's also the Citizen's Guide to Armed Defense, right? Did I say that title correctly?
Correct. That is correct.
Those are good books that I have in my library. I've read them years ago. They're still absolutely relevant. Kevin, people don't know, I'm sure, but you and I met. I was thinking about it this morning. It's been 2008 we met. We were both writing for officer.com. Were you the use of force columnist at that time, or was it firearms?
I was officer survival columnist, I think.
Okay. Okay. And I was the defensive tactics columnist. And yeah, we've been buddies ever since. And I love to pick your brain about all stuff, martial arts and use of force related. But no, that's good stuff.
Well,
if you guys don't have those books, I highly recommend getting hold of those.
Well, thank you, Rich. I appreciate the shout out, but I thought about you and I went down to Norfolk. The Blackhawk Products Group brought us down with our friend, Laura, and she was doing product rep for them. And we were at the aquarium in Norfolk, as I remember, and you and I were having a beer after dinner, and we looked at each other and said, I can't believe that I'm here, And then Mike Knoll, remember the CEO of Blackhawk, came over and said, there's nothing better than a beer after dinner, and you and I dude, and once again, that imposter syndrome, if they find out who we really are.
Yeah, surreal. It really was surreal. And then look at us now. I mean, they knew we were going to be big shots, Kevin, right? Oh, that's good stuff. So, okay, back to a serious note. What do you think are some of the things that a private citizen who carries a firearm, what are some things that would be prudent for him or her to do as far as protecting themselves from either prosecution or liability?
Wow. Very much similar. Once again, the parallels between law enforcement, a private citizen is very great. First of all, I would say competence. And that's more than just going to the range once or twice a year or having a gun. Competence leads to confidence. And when you have confidence, you can help control something called the sympathetic nervous system reaction, or fight or flight. And you make better cognitive decisions. And, once again, coupled with, I would say, to not only get the physical skills to be able to deliver fast and accurate fire on target, but also to stress test that a little bit in some dynamic confrontation simulation. Back in the day, you and I used simunition or paint marking rounds. I've seen a buddy of, I think you met, was doing some law enforcement training out in Washington, Rich Daniel. He was doing airsoft pistols, so there are ways where the private citizen can still engage in this type of training and with role players, if at all possible, so that what you're doing, and some of this can be stressful, but some of it can be ratcheted back. So the officer, they wanted to make it larger than life, but winnable, but survivable. That's the key. So with the private sector, you just want to be able to learn things like our buddy John Farnham says, get those tape loops so that you know what you have, you've already thought about what you're going to say, so that you don't have to think about it and use some of your bandwidth, as it were, in the heat of the moment, coming up with what you're going to articulate, have that pre-planned. And so I think that those are the physical skills that you can build. But the other part of it is knowledge. And that is to learn more about the legal standards on police use of force. I appreciate you shouting out about my book, but our buddy Masadi Yuba is a treasure trove of information. And I actually had the opportunity to sit through Mass's 5-day use of force control instructor program. Excuse me. And you got Andrew Branco, who's an attorney who's written an excellent book on use of force. There are things out there. And so the education, that's a continual basis. This is a tremendous responsibility to be not only competent, but knowledgeable about the topic area of armed self-defense. It's not as easy as just having a gun in your sock drawer, and when something goes bump in the middle of the night, you pull out your trusty 6-shooter and go downstairs. I mean, those things end in tragedy oftentimes, with family members being shot or somebody going out because they hear somebody rummaging in their car and then shooting at a teenager that was trying to steal out of their car. Those things, I've worked on some of those cases, and I unfortunately, they have to tell the attorneys, I'm sorry, I can't help your client out. The next thing is the prepaid legal, get some type of, it's not really insurance, but it's some type of plan. For instance, I have, because I'm a retired police officer, I have the Fraternal Order of Police legal protection plan, but I also have the Armed Citizens legal protection plan as well. And, I'm cognizant about the cost of some of these cases. I mean, I've worked on murder cases with officers as defendants where the overall cost of the trial, where we got the officer acquitted, was over $1 million. Now, in Ohio, it doesn't tend to be that much, but you're talking at least 50,000 plus. So more than what you and I have in the bank readily available to defend ourselves. And I'm sure the people out there, and even if you have it, that money, that'd be your nest egg, that'd be your retirement oftentimes. So you got to have the physical skills to pay the bills, as they say, but you also have to have that knowledge of the law. So you're making good legal decisions. Have look around your area. Oftentimes, a good legal counsel to talk to or retain, or at least say, "Hey, can I call you in the middle of the night?" is an attorney that works for your local police department defending officers that are involved in the use of force incident. So they're oftentimes knowledgeable with the dynamics of these things, and then make sure that you have some type of prepaid legal.
That all makes perfect sense, Kevin. People think that, a cliche is all they need. Better be carried by, tried by 12 than carried by 6. It's like, yeah, that may be true, but there's a whole lot more to it than that. And the more knowledge, here's one of the things I think people forget. The more knowledgeable you are about use of force law, the less hesitant you're going to be to respond. So it's actually beneficial, even from a tactical standpoint, in my opinion, that you're knowledgeable of the law. I mean, what's your take on that, Kevin?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the best shooting that ever occurs is the one that doesn't. If these things can be avoided, like our buddy John Farnham, and shout out to both John and Mass, and I know your buddy Dave Spalding and all those guys, because they are the forerunners of what we do and our history. Cool picture of all of us at SHOT Show, by the way.
I love that.
But the thing is that you have to have that together, all of that together. And even with the knowledge that even if you make all the right decisions, you still may be charged in a perfect lawful use of deadly force incident. And by the way, use of non-deadly force as well. Pepper spraying could result in you being charged with the crime. But also understanding that, and here's my other thing I omitted, but having that counsel and understanding that you never, ever want to talk to your police and give an interview without your counsel present, without a counsel that you've talked to in advance, that you've gone over things, etc. But whether you're a civilian or private citizen or a law enforcement officer, never, ever walk in there without your attorney present. And I've seen, I don't know how many cases now where officers as well as citizens going, hey, I didn't do anything wrong, ergo and therefore I'm going to be okay. That's so naive, so naive.
Yeah, it doesn't make you look innocent to do that necessarily. It's foolish, because especially if it's in close proximity to after you've defended yourself, your mind is not working the way it normally works because of this intense, stressful situation that you've just been through. Like in law enforcement, you can speak better to this than me, but I believe in law enforcement, when they're investigating a critical incident, the trend is to give the officer like 2 or 3 sleep cycles before giving a detailed account of what happened. That way he's able to more clearly articulate what happened. And you mentioned articulation earlier, and I think that that's something that's often overlooked, whether law enforcement or private citizen, is it's important to be able to understand the law and to act within the law, but you also have to be able to articulate why you did what you did. And that could be articulating it to your attorney. That could be articulating it in the form of a police report if we're talking about a police officer. But that's why it's so hard. You and I have had conversations about this. It's so hard to find the perfect cop, because the perfect cop, knows how to find bad guys. When he finds bad guys, has the physical skills and ability to deal with the bad guys, to take them into custody. And then he can articulate in a very detailed and accurate police report why he did what he did. But most of us are good at one of those things and not as good at the others. So it's difficult, but it is sort of a kind of a cliche here, but kind of a holistic approach. Like, having a gun isn't enough. Knowing about the law isn't enough. Understanding tactics isn't enough. You need all of those sort of integrated to really be effective at protecting yourself from a deadly threat, both on the scene and subsequently in court. Because if you're using force that's going to result in someone sustaining what we call great bodily injury, serious bodily injury, or death, you can pretty much rest assured you're going to be going on trial for that. I mean, so you want to act as though that were going to happen.
No, that's exactly true. And with my guys and gals, I don't know where it came popular that officers will go in there and they'll always throw this in. Then, in fear of my life is when I fired, and that's a concept, but it's not enough to just go in the interview and say, I was in fear for my life. You have to say why you were in fear for your life. You have to give what we call in law enforcement, and it works the same way in the private sector, is the totality of the circumstances. You have to create that, whether it's in your writing or in your statement, why you felt that fear, what the suspect did that created that sense of immediacy of death or serious bodily harm on their part, why you tried something else and it failed. You said the perfect word is you have to tell them why you did what you did. It's simply not enough to go in there and think that, and it could be something even with an armed suspect. It's not to go in there and think, oh, they're going to see the gun on the floor or the BWC video showing the gun in the guy's hand, and they're going to come to the conclusion that I did. It's just not enough. And even with attorneys oftentimes will give some really bad advice, so you want to get the right attorney, someone that has experience in this. And there are specialists out there, and we've gotten to meet some of them or know their names. And that's the kind of people that you want to be able to work with you, whether you're an officer or a private citizen, in crafting the narrative of why the suspect created this immediacy of death or serious bodily harm.
Absolutely, Kevin. And you mentioned body-worn cameras. And those, I think, those who were not big fans of law enforcement wanted us all to have these. And now that we have them, it basically proves that we're doing right most of the time. And I know for me personally, on a very, mundane level, it's gotten me out of a lot of complaints where someone would say that I cursed at them or I called them this or whatever. I was like, dude, there's body-worn camera footage that shows exactly what happened. But body-worn cameras, as effective as they can be at helping to paint the picture of what happened, they don't tell you everything. For instance, in a physical sense, my body-worn camera is facing this way. If I'm looking this way, I'm not necessarily seeing what my body-worn camera is saying. Plus, there's the full interpretation aspect, whereas just because the camera sees something doesn't mean I see it and perceive it in the way that you see it watching the body-worn camera footage on your couch the next day. Hence the no judging based on Monday morning quarterback from Graham versus Connor. But it's frustrating because that does tend to happen. And we all know, everybody with a, half a brain understands that the news is only showing the snippet right here where the officer finally used whatever force, not the huge lead up to it. And they're going to paint law enforcement in the most, damaging light possible, because that's what sells, I was going to say newspapers, but that's what sells, subscriptions or gets likes or whatever it is in this, social media world that we're in. But it's frustrating and it's hard to find young people who are very qualified who want to be cops. When you became a cop and when I became a cop, it was very competitive. I remember sitting in a room with thousands of people, to try to get hired. And now it's like, I don't know. Unless it's your burning passion, I don't think people are going to enter law enforcement, not the people we want.
It's tough. Yeah. Recruitment is down throughout the country. And I'll just say this, because it dovetails with the BWC unit. My last 3 years of full-time police work were spent working in the BWC unit. And I'll tell you how bad law enforcement is. At that time, my first day in my new unit, my chief of police comes over, and he wasn't the worst guy, but he made a point of coming over to my office and saying, he said, "Kevin, you know you're not going to be reviewing use of force on video, right?" And I said, no, chief, I didn't know that. And the amazing thing is after that, I worked on every single officer involved shooting until I retired from the police department. And I edited together the first public records release of BWC videos. And I had asked for multiple schools to go to digital video schools and digital video evidence, and they wouldn't send me. So I sent myself. So I had educated myself about how to interpret and analyze digital video evidence. And I asked for some advanced software back in the day. It was called Input Ace. Now it's called Axon. The people that put out the tasers have now bought that company, so it's called Axon Investigate. And so I used those software along with Adobe Premiere Pro in my job. And, you know, just as for instance, video is not a continuous thing. Most body-worn cameras are shot at about 29.97 or roughly 30 frames per second, which means there's 30 individual photos. And because of something called compression, not all video is each picture is what they call an iframe. For instance, up in here in this picture, it may be reconstituted by the program because nothing's happening up here. You know, so you have compression, you have this lens distortion. For instance, in a BWC camera, they use a fisheye lens. Well, it's going to cause this line over here to curve. So you're going to have lens distortion. And that can make objects look further away than they actually are. I worked a shooting in which the shooting took place at about 10 feet away from the officer, but it looked like it was 20 feet or so, which distorts, the depth perception of the images. And then, you have a variety of different things that go on with digital video. And it's instead of looking at video as one piece of the evidence, like you said, just because the camera focused on me now is capturing me doesn't mean that I'm not looking over here. Or if the camera, which is mounted at 12 to 18 inches below my line of sight, is capturing one thing, my head turns and I'm focused on something else. So there's a lot of research out there now that used eye trackers and compared that to what the camera was capturing and found a lot of difference there. So I've even gone in and in post incident analysis found the subject with that drawing. For instance, a local case was a subject, he was a juvenile that was walking around for whatever reason, the streets of Akron with a plastic gun pointing it at houses. And so a caller was alarmed, put out a 911 call. The officer pulls up and the kid lifts his hoodie up and draws his plastic gun out. And the officer goes, heck, and fires one shot, which wounds the kid. He ends up dropping the gun. But you can see the gun in the kid's hand. And yet the city didn't want to put that out. That image, they put later image where the kid had his hands up as if he was shot when he had his hands up. So Rich, I make good money doing what I do now, but I earn every penny of it. And that's what a good attorney is going to do, and a good expert, for instance, video analysts, which I am not. I'm not to that level. What I am is a force on video analyst. In other words, they know the zeros and ones, whereas I know what the camera is capturing.
Kevin, are you doing private citizens as well as far as, are you taking cases for private citizens or just law enforcement? Are you working expert witness on?
I take both, Rich. I've done a decent amount over the last couple of years. I'd say I probably have done about 6 private citizen use of deadly force cases. And so the answer simply is yes. And unfortunately, that prosecution is ticked up as the law enforcement officers' prosecution is ticked up as well. And, our buddy, I get a lot of referrals from Masayu, who is swamped, and, others that I've dealt with on private citizen cases. So, yes.
What do you think the private citizen needs to know? And you alluded to this earlier, but just in a very succinct way, what does a private citizen need to know about their right to defend themselves with a firearm? Like what threshold are they looking at before they bring a firearm into play?
Well, in Ohio, I'll use that standard. And Andrew Bronca kind of mirrors this standard as well. As first of all, the private citizen has to be innocent. In other words, they can't be the one that started the fight that led to the shooting. They can't be the one that confronted the bad guy, like in a road rage type thing, even though the bad guy or the victim comes out of the car with a baseball bat and then you shoot them. If they're so innocence is important. The next thing is that there has to be some element of proportionality, so that the proportional thing, it would be that the private citizen is facing the immediate or imminent, and those words are used pretty much interchangeably. They're facing imminent or immediate death or serious bodily harm. Of course, there are standard ground laws now throughout the country, so you don't have to retreat. Back in the day, not so awfully long ago, Ohio, it was the citizen had to prove their innocence, not the state prove their guilt. So that changed, fortunately, a few years ago. But you have to understand that there is going to be the standard of reasonableness, and that if there's a chance where there's this breakage of contact, for instance, the suspect runs away, the private citizen does not have the right to pursue and use deadly force as the suspect's running away. So they have to be innocent of guilt. There has to be the use of deadly force has to be reasonable, and if the suspect runs away, that the private citizen has to allow them to do that.
Very good, very well articulated, Kevin. One thing I'd like to get your take on is the use of verbal commands. Or verbal warnings, you could say. In law enforcement, we do that a lot, whether it's a canine announcement, you're making an announcement before releasing the dog, or you have your firearm out and you're giving the suspect commands. Some people, I think, are under the impression that a private citizen should always give a verbal warning. And I don't really agree with that. I agree that they could be beneficial, but what's your take on that, on the use of verbal warnings prior to using deadly force?
Well, even in law enforcement, in Tennessee versus Garner, it says some type of warning has to be given when feasible.
Feasible.
For instance, yes, not all circumstances is it feasible or practical for the officer or the citizen to give a warning. I mean, if somebody is shooting at you or drawing a firearm or swinging your way with a pistol in their hand, it's the time to act, not the time to articulate. So that those circumstances, the use of verbal warning is not feasible or practical for that matter. That said, there are often times when verbal warnings, for instance, instead of getting in one of those situations where you legally were allowed to use force, you're still in the jackpot. And once again, even if you, as in the case I talked about where the suspect was breaking in the front door of the residence when he was shot and killed, even under those types of circumstances, there still was a civil suit. So yes, the insurance company provided my services and the attorney's services to defend that action. It still was weighty on the mind and the life of the defender, of the law-abiding citizen. So if you can avoid those situations at all possible, that's the best thing. And maybe that's a verbal warning. I think John Farnham has said things like, run away, just get out. You're in my house. Instead of shooting them dead, get out, and that's a win-win there, because you don't have that to go through that process and the emotional toll of using deadly force. And even in the best of shootings, remember, your reaction to a shooting is, your reaction to society's reactions oftentimes, and that can heat back. You're going to probably be on the front page of the local paper or in the local news. And then even family members can be critical of your decision to use deadly force. So if you can avoid that at all possible, then that's the best recommendation. That said, I'm an advocate for, to have an armed defense, as well as having those other less lethal tools around, so you can say, yes, I had pepper spray, but it was not the time to use it. Yes, I had these other means. I mean, my wife was a physical therapist and did geriatric home health, and she had a Taser C2 that she would carry, which is a civilian version of the Taser. And, so I advocate having a repertoire of force options, if for no other reason that you can say, hey, I didn't use it because the suspect did not give me the time. He created this immediate threat of death or serious bodily harm by his actions, and I couldn't pepper spray him, couldn't hit him with the baton, couldn't use a civilian, electronic control device, etc.
So, Kevin, in 2019, you received quite an honor. You were inducted into the Law Enforcement Hall of Fame. Tell us just a little bit about that and what that meant to you.
Wow, Rich, that was one of those things that you want to say it's kind of like that Wayne's World, we're not worthy, but it was something that I accepted being based on the spirit in which it was given. And, even though I fought back my imposter syndrome, I accepted it in large part because I was there because I stood on the shoulders of giants coming up, and so many people that trained me that, I passed on their teachings to my officers and to anyone I trained. And so I felt severely honored by it. And my family was suitably proud, to say the least. But, it's one of those things that you never think when you're toiling in the fields. I mean, I was thinking about our conversation today, and I thought, some people said, why don't you come back and do firearms training? And I said, do you know how many hours and hours I spent in the beating down sun, running multiple lines a day and indoor ranges, standing on concrete and DT, all those years of doing DT. Needless to say, I'm a little beat up. So me doing the classroom presentations and courtroom presentations now is something that I enjoy, based on, quite honestly, wearing myself out over the years. But it was a distinct honor.
Well, you're doing the Lord's work, brother, and I'm proud to call you friend, and you're well deserving of all the accolades that you've received. Continued success, brother, and thanks a lot for being on the show today. Where can people go to find out what you're up to, or if they want to get in touch with you for one reason or another?
Well, once again, Rich, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It is anytime that people like you can help get the word out with your guests and with your shows is appreciated. I would just say that I have to crank the volume up because I oftentimes listen when I'm mowing the lawn, but I had to get headphones because I couldn't hear with earbuds. But people can tune into my website. I do blog posts at KD, that's K as in Kevin, D as in Davis, -forcetraining.com. So it's KD -forcetraining.com. And there's a link there if they want to send me an email, if there's questions they might have, etc. I probably respond quickest to email just because of the way my work goes. Don't have a lot of time for phone calls, but I appreciate everything you're doing, brother. It's nice to see that both of us have made it out of our careers upright and vertical versus horizontal. And we may have some scars, but most of them are way heavy on our heart.
Absolutely, Kevin. Well, thank you so much, brother. I look forward to seeing you soon. Well, folks, that's a wrap for this episode with Kevin Davis. If this episode resonated with you, be sure and let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Aimpoint's Taking Aim podcast. We'll see you next time.